Beneath the shimmering veneer of love lies a shadow so dark it can eclipse even the brightest bonds. We often imagine love as a sanctuary, a refuge from the chaos of the world, a force that heals, uplifts, and endures. But what happens when that sanctuary becomes a prison, when love twists into something forbidden, secretive, and drenched in blood? In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Herndon, Virginia, a story unfolded that shattered this illusion, revealing a chilling truth. Sometimes the most dangerous threats lurk within the walls of our own homes, hidden behind smiles and whispered promises. This is not a tale of spontaneous passion or fleeting madness. It's a meticulously woven tragedy, a descent into betrayal and violence so calculated it defies comprehension. At its heart are three souls: Christine Banfield, a pediatric nurse whose compassion earned her the nickname Angel among her patients; Brendan Banfield, her husband, a federal agent cloaked in the respectability of his IRS badge; and Juliana Perez Magalhães, their young Brazilian au pair, entrusted with the care of their innocent 4-year-old daughter, Valerie. What began as an ordinary family arrangement spiraled into a deadly conspiracy, leaving behind an appalling scene that would haunt investigators and unravel the facade of a perfect life. A home in an upscale neighborhood, manicured lawns, soft porch lights glowing in the dusk, the faint hum of suburban calm. Inside, Christine moved through her days with quiet dedication, her hands skilled at soothing the sick, her heart anchored by her love for her daughter. Brendan, with his steady government job and authoritative demeanor, seemed the archetype of stability, and Juliana, vibrant and youthful, brought energy to the household, her role as au pair, a bridge between work and family life. To the outside world, they were a portrait of balance, a modern family navigating the demands of careers and parenthood with the help of a trusted caretaker. But beneath this polished surface, a storm was brewing, its currents fueled by desire, deception, and a chilling resolve. The seeds of this disaster were sown in August 2022, when Brendan and Juliana crossed an invisible line. Their relationship, at first a whisper of attraction, blossomed into a full-blown affair, secretive, intoxicating, and utterly forbidden. It wasn't just a betrayal of Christine's trust, it was a violation of the very foundation of their home. Juliana, welcomed as a caretaker, became something far more dangerous, a partner in a romance that thrived in the shadows. They stole moments together, their connection deepening with every glance, every touch. Romantic photographs captured their stolen joy snapshots of a trip to New York City, where they played the part of a carefree couple far from the responsibilities waiting back in Virginia. These images, later uncovered, would stand as silent witnesses to a bond that grew too strong to contain. As months passed, their affair evolved from reckless passion into something far more sinister. Brendan, torn between the life he'd built with Christine and the forbidden thrill of Juliana, began to voice a chilling desire. He wanted his wife gone. Not through the mess of divorce or the honesty of separation, but through a permanent, irreversible act. Juliana, perhaps swept up in the intensity of their connection or swayed by the power he held over her, didn't recoil. Instead, she listened, nodded, and slowly became complicit. What might have started as a fleeting fantasy hardened into a plan, a blueprint for murder so cold it would shock even the most seasoned detectives. The bedroom that once held the quiet intimacy of marriage became the staging ground for treachery. Late-night whispers replaced marital conversations as Brendan and Juliana plotted in hushed tones while Christine worked night shifts at the hospital. The same walls that witnessed the growth of the Banfield family now contained a conspiracy that would tear it apart. Every shared secret, every stolen kiss within that home was a betrayal of the trust Christine had placed in both her husband and the woman hired to care for their child. Neighbors would later recall seeing Brendan and Juliana together, noting their unusual closeness, but dismissing it as friendly rapport between employer and employee. They seemed comfortable with each other, one neighbor would tell investigators, but I never suspected. Who could imagine something like this? The facade they maintained was impeccable, Brendan still playing the devoted husband when Christine was present, Juliana still performing her duties as an au pair, caring for Valerie with apparent dedication. This duplicity only made their eventual actions all the more shocking to those who knew them. This wasn't a crime born of impulse. It was a scheme crafted with precision. Brendan purchased a Glock 43X for Juliana, a sleek, deadly tool that he taught her to wield at a shooting range. Each pull of the trigger, each echo of gunfire, was a rehearsal for the violence to come. They didn't stop there. To cloak their intentions, they devised an elaborate ruse, one that would pull an innocent stranger into their web. Using a fetish website, a shadowy corner of the internet where fantasies blur with reality, Brendan created a fake profile, posing as Christine. He wove a tale of consensual knife play and restraints, luring a man named Joseph Ryan to their home with promises of an encounter that would never come to pass. Joseph, a 38-year-old from Springfield with no ties to the Banfields, stepped into their trap, believing he was chasing a thrill. He had no idea he was walking toward his death. The digital trail they left behind revealed a calculated approach to their murderous plot. Brendan meticulously researched local shooting ranges where he could train Juliana without arousing suspicion, selecting one far enough from their neighborhood to minimize the chance of being recognized. Credit card records would later show multiple visits, each session another step in preparing Juliana for her role in the killing. The gun purchase was equally premeditated. Brendan chose the Glock 43X specifically for its manageable size and reliability, suitable for Juliana's smaller hands, but deadly enough for their purpose. Their communications about the plan were deliberately obscured, using coded language and private messaging apps that promised encryption and discretion. When discussing their intentions, they referred to the murder as the change or moving forward, never speaking plainly about the violence they intended to commit. Investigators would later reconstruct these conversations from digital fragments, piecing together the chilling evolution of their plot through recovered text messages and email exchanges. The fetish website profile created by Brendan was a masterclass in manipulation. Using photos of Christine obtained without her knowledge, he crafted a persona that was both enticing and believable. He studied the language of the community, adopting its terminology and norms to create a profile that wouldn't raise suspicions among regular users. The messages he exchanged with Joseph Ryan reflected a deep understanding of how to exploit curiosity and desire, gradually escalating the fantasy until Joseph agreed to come to their home. Each message was carefully composed to ensure Joseph's continued interest while also setting the stage for the narrative they would later present to police that Joseph had come to their home with violent intentions. By February 24, 2023, the stage was set. The Banfield home, once a haven, became a theater of horror. Christine, oblivious to the storm gathering around her, went about her mourning, her daughter Valerie playing in the basement below. Joseph arrived, his footsteps echoing with misplaced anticipation. Brendan and Juliana, armed and resolute, waited in the wings. What unfolded next was a symphony of violence, calculated, brutal, and unrelenting. Juliana would later claim they entered the bedroom as Joseph restrained Christine, a scene staged to fit their narrative. Brendan, leveraging his federal authority, shouted, "Police!" before firing his service weapon into Joseph's head and chest. Blood sprayed across the room, a crimson testament to their betrayal. But the carnage didn't end there. Turning on his wife, Brendan stabbed Christine repeatedly, her neck and torso torn open by the blade. Juliana, her hands steady from those range sessions, fired again at Joseph as he twitched on the floor, ensuring his silence. The morning had begun with routine domesticity. Christine, having just completed a night shift at the pediatric ICU, returned home exhausted but dedicated to spending time with Valerie before catching up on sleep. She prepared breakfast for her daughter, unaware of the predators circling within her own home. The weather that day was unseasonably warm for February, sunshine filtering through kitchen windows, a cruel contrast to the darkness about to unfold. Valerie was dressed in her favorite purple pajamas, her small voice chattering about a cartoon she wanted to watch as her mother guided her down to the basement playroom, equipped with a television and toys to keep her occupied. As Joseph Ryan approached the Banfield residence, he checked the address on his phone one last time, perhaps feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. He parked his silver Honda Civic on the street, taking care not to block any driveways, a small courtesy from a man who had no idea he was minutes from death. Neighbors would later recall seeing him approach the front door, dressed casually in jeans and a dark jacket, looking like any other visitor on a Friday morning. One neighbor was walking a dog and noted that Joseph smiled politely as they passed each other on the sidewalk. Inside, Brendan had positioned himself strategically, his service weapon loaded and ready. Juliana moved through the house with calculated ease, her own gun concealed but accessible. They had rehearsed this moment countless times in whispered conversations, plotting the timing to ensure Valerie would be safely isolated in the basement, out of sight but close enough to support their narrative of a protective father defending his family. The layout of their suburban home, with its master bedroom upstairs and finished basement below, provided the perfect staging area for their gruesome plan. The attack itself was executed with military precision. When Joseph entered the bedroom, expecting to find the woman from the fetish website, he instead encountered a nightmare. The shock registered on his face just seconds before Brendan's bullets tore through his body. The first shot struck him in the chest, the impact throwing him backward against the bedroom wall. The second bullet found his head, silencing any cry for help before it could form. Christine's terror was equally short-lived. Her husband's transformation from protector to executioner occurred in a heartbeat. The knife Brendan plunged into her neck severed her carotid artery, her lifeblood pulsing onto the cream-colored carpet in rhythmic spurts that quickly slowed as her heart faltered and stopped. The aftermath was chaos cloaked in calculation. Juliana dialed 911, her voice trembling as she hung up twice before finally connecting. When she did, Brendan took the phone, spinning a tale of self-defense, a man stabbing his wife, a husband forced to act. It was a lie as deliberate as the blood he smeared from Christine's wounds onto Joseph's body, a desperate attempt to frame the dead man as the villain. Upstairs, the bedroom lay in ruin. Christine, naked save for her socks, bled out beside Joseph's lifeless form. A bloody knife and 2 handguns littered the scene, silent accomplices to the slaughter. Below, Valerie remained untouched but forever scarred, her innocence a fragile survivor in a house-turned tomb. Those first 911 calls, later analyzed by forensic audio specialists, revealed Juliana's calculated performance. The first two hang-ups were not failures of nerve, but deliberate pauses to align their stories, to ensure both she and Brendan were reading from the same script. When the connection was finally established, the dispatcher heard a woman's voice trembling with what seemed like shock, but what investigators would later identify as the controlled modulation of someone playing a role. "There's blood, so much blood," she gasped, the theatrical quality of her distress lost on the dispatcher, who immediately dispatched emergency services to the address. Brendan's takeover of the call was equally performative. His voice, steadied by years of federal service, projected authority and the righteous indignation of a man who had just protected his family. "I'm an IRS agent," he identified himself immediately, establishing his credentials to lend weight to his account. "I came home and found this man attacking my wife. She's been stabbed. I had to shoot him." The dispatcher's questions were met with precise, prepared responses, each one reinforcing the narrative they had constructed. When asked if the attacker was still alive, Brendan's response was clinical. "No, he's not a threat anymore. Please hurry. My wife needs help." The performance was convincing enough to buy them precious minutes before suspicion would take root. As sirens wailed in the distance, Brendan and Juliana enacted the final touches of their charade. He deliberately smeared Christine's blood on Joseph's hands and clothing, creating the impression that Joseph had been the assailant. Meanwhile, Juliana went to check on Valerie, ensuring the child remained downstairs, shielded from the carnage above. This act served dual purposes, protecting the child from trauma while also establishing Juliana's role as a concerned caregiver rather than an accomplice to murder. When police arrived minutes later, they found Brendan cradling his wife's lifeless body, his own hands and clothes saturated with her blood, in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to stop her bleeding. The image was powerful, a husband devastated by his failure to save his wife, but it was as carefully constructed as everything else about that morning. Police arrived to a tableau of horror, an appalling scene that defied their training. Two bodies, a frantic couple, and a story that didn't quite add up. Brendan and Juliana clung to their script, but cracks were already forming. Detectives, their instincts sharpened by years on the job, sensed the dissonance. The blood spatter told a different tale, one of manipulation, not desperation. Forensic analysis would later confirm it. Christine's blood on Joseph wasn't a natural spill. It was a smear, a forgery of guilt. Text messages, romantic photos, and digital breadcrumbs exposed the affair, dismantling their facade. And then there was Juliana's next move, moving into the primary bedroom with Brendan, a framed picture of their smiling faces on the nightstand. It was a bold, almost defiant act, as if the murders had cleared the way for their new life. The first responders who entered the Banfield home that morning would later describe the scene as one of the most disturbing of their careers. The master bedroom, once a place of rest, had been transformed into something from a nightmare: walls spattered with blood, the metallic scent of death hanging heavy in the air, and two bodies sprawled in unnatural poses on the floor. One veteran officer had to step outside to compose himself, the brutality of the scene momentarily overwhelming his professional detachment. The contrast between the violence upstairs and the cheerful sounds of children's television drifting up from the basement created a surreal dissonance that several officers mentioned in their reports. Detective Sarah Morales, the lead investigator assigned to the case, arrived 30 minutes after the initial call. With 15 years of homicide experience, she had developed an intuition for discerning truth from fiction, and something about the scene immediately struck her as wrong. The staging was too perfect, she would later testify. Everything aligned too neatly with their story. She noted the positioning of the bodies, the placement of the weapons, the blood patterns on the floor and walls, all slightly too arranged, too deliberate for the chaotic struggle Brendan had described. The forensic team arrived soon after, meticulously photographing and collecting evidence that would eventually dismantle Brendan and Juliana's carefully constructed narrative. Blood spatter analysis revealed patterns inconsistent with Brendan's account of the events. Christine's wounds, examined by the medical examiner, showed angle and depth variations that suggested her attacker had stood directly in front of her, not approached from behind as would be expected in the scenario Brendan had described. Most damning was the smeared blood on Joseph's hands. The directionality of the smears indicated they had been applied after his death, a deliberate attempt to frame him posthumously. Digital forensic specialists recovered deleted text messages and photos from both Brendan and Juliana's phones, documenting not only their affair, but also the evolution of their murderous plan. Location data placed them at shooting ranges on multiple occasions in the months leading up to the murders. Browser history revealed searches for topics like undetectable poisons, how to make a murder look like self-defense, and knife wounds versus gunshot wounds, which is more fatal. Each digital breadcrumb reinforced investigators' growing certainty that they were dealing not with a tragic case of self-defense, but with a meticulously planned double homicide. The investigation stretched over months, a slow unraveling of lies. Juliana was arrested in October 2023. Charged with second-degree murder, her world shrinking to the cold confines of Fairfax County Jail. Brendan faced justice later, indicted in September 2024 on 4 counts of aggravated murder, a firearm charge, and most wrenchingly, felony child abuse and neglect for the trauma inflicted on Valerie. By October 2024, Juliana flipped, pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for her testimony against Brendan. Prosecutors pushed for time served, her sentencing delayed until his trial in February 2025, a gamble to seal his fate. If convicted, Brendan faces life without parole, a steep fall for a man who once wore a badge of trust. During her months in jail awaiting trial, Juliana's facade began to crumble. Fellow inmates reported hearing her cry at night, murmuring in Portuguese what sounded like prayers or pleas for forgiveness. The bravado that had sustained her through the planning and execution of the murders gave way to a creeping realization of the magnitude of her actions. When approached by prosecutors with an offer to reduce her charges in exchange for testimony against Brendan, she seized the opportunity with a desperation that surprised even her own defense attorney. The woman who had coldly participated in a double homicide now trembled visibly during meetings with prosecutors, her youth suddenly apparent in her frightened eyes and quivering voice. Brendan's response to his arrest was markedly different. Even as evidence mounted against him, he maintained his innocence with a steadfastness that bordered on delusion. During interrogations, he stuck rigidly to his original story, refusing to acknowledge the existence of the affair despite being shown photographic evidence. His federal training seemed to have prepared him. For this moment he knew precisely how to engage with investigators without revealing anything incriminating, answering questions with measured responses that provided no new information. It was only when confronted with Juliana's cooperation with prosecutors that the first cracks in his composure appeared. "She's lying," he insisted, his voice rising for the first time during hours of questioning. "She's trying to save herself." For Christine's family, the legal proceedings reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. Her parents, now caring for Valerie, attended every hearing, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. Christine's mother clutched a small photo of her daughter in her pediatric nurse uniform, a talisman against the horror of the proceedings. Her father's once robust frame seemed to have collapsed inward, his shoulders perpetually hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. They sat silently as prosecutors detailed the betrayal and violence that had stolen their daughter, their only outward reaction an occasional tightening of clasped hands or a quickly brushed-away tear. Valerie, too young to fully comprehend the legal proceedings, nevertheless carried the weight of that day in February. Child psychologists working with her noted recurring nightmares, sudden fear of loud noises, and an unusual wariness around adult men she didn't know well. Her drawings, once bright and cheerful, now featured dark colors and shadowy figures. When asked about her mother, she would sometimes grow quiet before saying, "Mommy had to go away because of the bad thing that happened." The innocence in her voice when speaking these words was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire tragedy, a child trying to make sense of the senseless, unaware that the bad thing had been orchestrated by the very people entrusted with her care. This story is a labyrinth of betrayal, Brendan's of his wife, Juliana's of the family who embraced her, and, together, their betrayal of humanity itself. It's a descent from love's promise into a nightmare of their own making, where trust became a weapon and loyalty a ghost. Christine's wedding rings, once symbols of unity, now glint with irony, while Valerie, the silent survivor, bears the weight of their choices. As we peel back the layers, we're left to wonder, how does love curdle into such darkness? How do ordinary lives veer into extraordinary evil? This is only the beginning, a tale that demands we look closer, question deeper, and brace for what's yet to come. The community of Herndon, once insulated from such violence, found itself forever changed. Neighbors who had exchanged casual greetings with the Banfields now questioned their own judgment, wondering what other secrets might lurk behind the doors of their peaceful suburb. Parents who had hired au pairs or nannies found themselves conducting more thorough background checks, installing subtle monitoring systems, becoming more present in their homes. The shadow of the Banfield case stretched across conversations at PTA meetings, neighborhood gatherings, and dinner tables throughout the area. "We never thought something like this could happen here," became a refrain, spoken with the shaken realization that here was no different from anywhere else when it came to the capacity for human darkness. For those who knew Christine professionally, the loss was particularly acute. The pediatric ICU, where she had worked for 7 years, held a memorial service that overflowed with colleagues, patients, and families whose lives she had touched. Speaker after speaker shared stories of her compassion, how she would stay past her shift to comfort a frightened child, how she remembered the names of siblings and pets, how she could coax a smile from even the most distressed patient. "She saved my son's life," one mother testified, her voice breaking. "Not just medically, but emotionally. She gave him hope when everything seemed hopeless." The hospital established a nursing scholarship in Christine's name, ensuring that her legacy of care would continue even after her life had been so brutally cut short. Perhaps most disturbing was the realization that Brendan and Juliana's relationship continued to flourish in the immediate aftermath of the murders. Neighbors reported seeing them together frequently, noting that Juliana had taken on an increasingly domestic role in the household. She prepared meals, did the shopping, and cared for Valerie with apparent devotion, all while sleeping in Christine's bed and using her belongings. One neighbor recalled seeing them at a local restaurant just 2 weeks after the murders, engaged in what appeared to be an intimate conversation, their hands occasionally touching across the table. There was something off about it, the neighbor later told police. They seemed almost relieved. It wasn't the behavior of people grieving. This public display of their connection, so soon after the violence they had perpetrated, struck many as the final insult to Christine's memory. The air in Herndon, Virginia, hangs heavy with the echoes of that fateful day, February 24th, 2023, a day when the veneer of suburban serenity was ripped apart by a violence so raw, so premeditated, it left an indelible scar on a community. The Banfield home, once a beacon of familial normalcy, had transformed into a crucible of betrayal, its walls, stained with the blood of 2 lives, snuffed out in a plot as intricate as it was depraved. Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan lay dead, their fates sealed by the hands of those they should have trusted most. Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez Magalhães, the architects of this horror, stood at the center, their secret affair the molten core of a conspiracy that spiraled into murder. As Brendan awaits his February 2025 trial, the evidence against him continues to mount. Juliana's testimony, secured through her plea deal, promises to be devastating, a first-hand account of the planning, execution, and cover-up that left 2 people dead. Prosecutors have assembled a formidable case, combining forensic evidence, digital records, and eyewitness accounts that point unmistakably toward premeditated murder. The defense team faces an uphill battle, their strategy rumored to focus on questioning Juliana's credibility and suggesting she was the primary instigator, manipulating Brendan through their relationship. But given the weight of evidence, legal experts predict this approach will do little to mitigate the severity of the charges or potential sentence. For Joseph Ryan's family, the trial represents the culmination of a painful journey toward understanding. His parents, both in their 70s, have attended every pre-trial hearing, seeking answers about how their son, described by friends as kind, adventurous, and trusting, became entangled in such a sinister plot. "He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time," his father told reporters outside the courthouse. "He never hurt anyone in his life." The knowledge that Joseph was deliberately targeted, lured to his death by strangers who needed a scapegoat, has been particularly difficult for them to process. Their grief is compounded by the senselessness of his loss, a random victim selected not for any personal connection, but simply because he was convenient to their scheme. The legal proceedings have also raised broader questions about oversight and accountability in the federal workforce. How did Brendan Banfield, a man capable of planning and executing such violence, maintain his position as a federal agent? Were there warning signs that colleagues or supervisors missed? Internal reviews at the IRS have yielded no clear answers by all accounts. Brendan was a model employee, his work performance consistently meeting or exceeding expectations. This disconnect between his professional persona and his capacity for violence has prompted calls for more comprehensive psychological evaluations of federal employees, particularly those authorized to carry weapons. What drives such darkness? Was it the allure of the forbidden, the rush of power over life and death? Or was it fear, the terror of losing what they'd built in the shadows? This case forces us to stare into the abyss of human nature, where love and loyalty can rot into something unrecognizable. It's a mirror held to our own lives, asking, who do we trust with our homes, our hearts? Brendan and Juliana didn't just kill, they dismantled the illusion of safety, leaving us to sift through the wreckage. As Brendan awaits trial, facing a life sentence, and Juliana barters her truth, the story lingers a haunting requiem for trust betrayed. Fade to black. But the questions remain, swirling like smoke in the silence. This isn't the end, it's a doorway to reflection, a call to probe the unseen corners of our world. What lies beneath the smiles we greet each day? What secrets simmer in the spaces we call safe? The Banfield case isn't just a crime, it's a warning, etched in blood and tears, urging us to see beyond the surface. Don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Diaries and click on the notification bell. Stay with us, for the shadows hold more stories, and the truth is rarely what it seems.